She was buried in darkness under Ceremony Hall, until Alpha King's instinct dragged him downstairs. Beneath the grand ceremony hall of Frosthold Castle, the air was cold and still. Stone walls, smooth and gray, hid secrets that no torch had ever touched. The hall above glittered with chandeliers and laughter, but below, darkness was absolute. It wrapped itself around the narrow corridors like a living thing, pressing against the ears and skin, whispering of things long forgotten. At the heart of this hidden labyrinth, in a chamber carved from black stone, a young woman sat curled on the floor. Her name was Alara, though no one had spoken it aloud in years. Her hair, dark as midnight, fell over her shoulders, and her eyes, sharp and stormy, reflected only the faint glimmer of the small lantern she had managed to keep lit. Alara had lived in darkness for as long as she could remember. Her earliest memories were of cold stone walls and the echo of footsteps that never lingered. Her family had abandoned her when she was 5, declaring her defective, a word that had burrowed into her soul and never left. They had whispered of curses, of power she could not yet understand. They had left her here, hidden beneath a hall meant for celebration, and she had learned to survive in silence. Years of solitude had made her strong. Her body was lean and nimble, her mind sharp as the edge of a dagger. She spoke to no one but shadows and the faint voice of a spirit that lingered in the walls, a memory of her ancestors perhaps, or a fragment of the curse that had been cast upon her. The voice whispered warnings, but also guidance. Alara had learned to listen, and she had learned to obey, for she knew the darkness would consume her if she did not. Tonight, however, the darkness was not enough to keep her safe. A strange tremor ran through the stone beneath her feet, a vibration unlike any she had felt before. It was soft at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew, as if someone, was calling to her from above. Her heart thudded in her chest, not with fear, but with recognition. She did not yet know why, but she knew the presence that stirred the hall above was hers to feel, as if the world itself had remembered her. Above, in the grand hall, the Alpha King of Frosthold, Kale, walked with the weight of his crown pressing upon him. He was a tall man, with broad shoulders and eyes the color of iron. His presence commanded attention, even in silence. Yet there was something in him tonight that made him restless. Something tugged at him, not the winds outside, not the voices of his council, but a pull deeper, more ancient, buried beneath the stone. Kale had ruled Frosthold for 10 years, but no man or woman had ever disturbed him in this way. His instincts were sharp, honed by decades of political maneuvering, of battles won and enemies destroyed. Yet the pull beneath the ceremony hall was unlike anything he had felt before. It was not a threat. It was a calling. He paused at the center of the hall, his eyes scanning the floor, sensing a presence that was almost alive. The silence between them stretched, unseen but palpable. Alara pressed her hand to the stone, feeling it vibrate in rhythm with her own heartbeat. She had never felt a human come this close without fear, without malice. And yet, there was something in him, something that made the shadows recoil, as if they too were curious. Kale's steps led him to a narrow corridor, one that had been sealed for generations. The stone was cold under his fingers, rough yet familiar, as though it remembered the hands that had touched it long ago. His instincts told him he was not just walking through stone, he was walking toward fate. He pressed against the wall, tracing the runes etched into it, runes that glimmered faintly in response to his touch. Alara held her breath. She did not know this man, yet she knew him. The voice in her head, the spirit that had guided her all these years, whispered a warning, sharp and urgent. Do not trust the light that calls. It may be both the sword and the shield. Kale's hand found a cold stone slab that shifted under his touch. The wall groaned, ancient hinges stirring, and a gap appeared, a passage opening into a chamber that had been sealed for centuries. He did not hesitate. His eyes narrowed as he stepped into the darkness, the pull stronger now, guiding him as if he had walked this path before. In another life, in another world. Alara rose to her feet, her muscles coiled and ready. She had no weapons, no armor, yet her presence alone was formidable. She did not run. She did not hide. She waited, instinctively knowing that this man would not be like the others who had passed her by in silence, leaving only the cold to greet her. When Kale entered the chamber, the lantern in her hand flickered, casting shadows across her face. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply regarded each other. The silence was thick, heavy with unspoken questions, with the weight of years spent apart. "Who are you?" Kale finally asked, his voice low, steady, but edged with curiosity. Elara's lips parted, but no words came. She had been alone so long, her voice had grown soft, almost unused. Instead, she let her eyes speak, fierce and guarded, yet tinged with wonder. "I could ask you the same," she whispered, her voice trembling like a leaf caught in the wind. Kale stepped closer, and the air between them seemed to vibrate, charged with something neither could name. His instincts screamed at him to reach out, to touch, to understand, yet something restrained him. He was a king, a ruler, a man who had conquered kingdoms and tamed armies, yet here he felt powerless. Alara's hand brushed against the stone wall as if drawing strength from it. She had been taught that the darkness could protect her, that it could be a shield against any danger. Yet the warmth of Kale's presence was different. It seeped into her bones, a quiet fire that both frightened and intrigued her. "You should not be here," she said finally, her voice firmer now. "No one has been here for centuries." "I could feel you," Kale replied, his eyes scanning the shadows. "I don't know why, but I had to come. I had to see." His words trailed off, and for the first time, he did not finish the sentence. Not because he could not, but because no words could capture the pull he felt toward her, the connection that defied reason. Elara's heart beat faster. She had been alone for so long, and yet here was a man who seemed to recognize her. Not her cage, not her curse, but her very essence. The thought both exhilarated and terrified her. "You do not understand," she said, taking a cautious step back. "The darkness, it is not kind. It does not forgive." "I do not seek forgiveness," Kale replied. "I seek truth." A shiver ran through the chamber as the walls themselves seemed to respond, the runes faintly glowing under Kale's gaze. The spirit that had whispered warnings to Elara stirred, uneasy, sensing change. Something ancient had been awakened, something that had been buried for generations, and now the balance was shifting. Elara took another step back, but her fear was tempered with curiosity. "Why? Why me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Kale hesitated. He did not know the answer, but his instincts told him he would find it here, in this hidden chamber with this girl who had lived her life beneath the world's eyes. "Because," he said finally, his voice low, steady, carrying a weight of authority and something more intimate. "I felt you." The words hung in the air like a promise, a question, a warning all at once. Elara felt a pulse of energy stir within her, a flicker of the power she had long suppressed. The shadows around her shifted, almost alive, as if recognizing the truth in Kale's claim. Neither of them moved for several heartbeats. The silence stretched thick and tense, broken only by the faint sound of their breathing and the distant echo of the hall above. Outside, the world carried on with music and laughter, oblivious to the moment unfolding beneath its feet. Then, as if guided by some unseen force, Kale stepped closer, reaching toward her, not with hands of command but hands of understanding. His gaze met hers, and for the first time, Elara did not flinch. She felt something in his presence, a mirror to her own longing, a recognition of the years she had spent in darkness. And then, just as quickly, a sound echoed through the chamber. A distant metallic clang from above, a warning that the world beyond the stone walls would not remain silent forever. Elara's eyes widened. She realized with a sudden sharp clarity that her life was about to change forever. She had been buried in darkness, hidden from kings and courtiers alike. But now, here he was, the Alpha King, drawn by instinct, drawn by something deeper than reason. The lantern flickered, throwing shadows that danced across the walls, and for the first time in years, Elara felt hope stir within her heart. but alongside it was fear, raw and unrelenting, for she knew that darkness and destiny often walked hand in hand. Kale reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The touch was gentle, careful, and yet it sent a tremor through both of them. Neither spoke, neither moved. The moment stretched, fragile and perfect, as if the chamber itself were holding its breath. And then Elara whispered a single word, her voice barely audible above the hush of shadows. "Why me?" Kale's gaze darkened with a mixture of awe, curiosity, and something he could not name. He did not answer. Not yet. He only stepped closer, knowing that whatever this connection was, it would change them both forever. Outside, the chandeliers above shimmered, oblivious to the world beneath. But down in the darkness, two fates had collided, and nothing would ever be the same again. The morning sun spilled into Frosthold Castle's grand halls, casting golden light across the marble floors and gilded walls. The nobles above moved with grace, discussing matters of the kingdom with careful smiles, unaware of the secret that stirred beneath their feet. Elara, now escorted into a room within the palace itself, sat quietly, her hands folded over the simple cloak she had been given. Chains, light, enchanted to suppress the stirrings of her power, clinked softly as she shifted, reminders of the life she had never chosen. Kale watched her from across the room. His posture was rigid, a king's poise trained into his very bones, yet the tension in his jaw betrayed the unease she had stirred in him. He had seen warriors die without a blink, enemies fall without hesitation, but Elara was different. She was not a soldier, nor a noble, nor a pawn to be used. She was something else entirely. Something that refused to be contained. "Eat!" Kale said, his voice steady but quiet as he placed a bowl of steaming broth on the table. His hand lingered briefly, as if hoping she would reach for it, but she did not. "I do not need it," Elara replied, her tone polite yet firm. She did not look at him. Her eyes followed the flickering shadows in the corner of the room, the small movements that no one else would notice. She had learned to read the subtle signs of danger long ago. Kale's eyes narrowed. "You have not eaten in how long?" She shrugged, almost imperceptibly. "Long enough?" The silence stretched between them. In that quiet, Kale studied her more closely. Her frame was slight, but there was strength in the way she held herself, a coiled energy that could strike without warning. Her eyes, stormy, defiant, and unafraid, looked at him now, and for a moment he saw not a prisoner, but a person who had endured far more than any child should. "You will not remain here in silence," Kale said, his voice firmer now. "You will speak. You will tell me who you are, and why you were hidden beneath the ceremony hall." Elara's gaze met his, steady, unwavering. "I have lived here because the world above fears me," she said. "Because my family, because of what I am." Her words were clipped, careful. She said nothing of the spirit that whispered to her, of the power that slumbered within her. Not yet. Kale leaned back, studying her. There was a pause, a silent calculation running behind his eyes. He could feel her power, subtle but undeniable, a force contained only by the chains that bound her wrists. His instincts, always sharp, always alert, warned him that this was no ordinary girl. And yet, she was not hostile, not fully. "Not yet. I need to understand," he said finally. "Not for the kingdom, not for my crown, but for you." Elara blinked. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever cared about her presence without fear, without prejudice. She wanted to retreat into the shadows, to hide once more, but something in his tone, a quiet, steady pull, made her hesitate. The first days passed in uneasy silence. Kale's servants moved around the room, bringing simple meals and clean water, but they kept their distance, wary of the girl beneath the king's gaze. Elara explored her new surroundings cautiously. The palace was a strange, bright world compared to the darkness she had known. Sunlight fell across polished floors, and the air smelled of flowers and burning wood. But even in this splendor, she felt the chains of her past, the memory of the stone walls, the echoes of the footsteps that never lingered, pressing against her heart. At night, the palace was quieter. Kale often found her in the shadows of the library, tracing her fingers over old books and scrolls, searching for knowledge of her own curse. He began to speak to her then, quietly, gently, not as a king commanding obedience, but as someone seeking understanding. "Do you know why your family?" He paused, uncertain how to phrase it. "Why they left you there?"
"They feared me," she said softly. "Not because I was weak or because I was foolish."
"Because they knew I could not be contained." Her voice was calm, but the words carried years of sorrow and anger. Kale watched her, and for the first time he felt a tug in his chest, a mixture of empathy, fascination, and something deeper he did not yet understand. He knew of curses, of magic that could twist and destroy lives, yet Alara's presence was different. She carried not only the mark of the past, but the promise of something more. Something that could either save or undo them both. Their conversations became tentative rituals. By day, Kale observed her, ensuring the chains held and her powers remained contained. By night, he listened as she spoke of the shadows that had been her companions, of the spirit that whispered warnings in the stone. And though neither fully trusted the other, a fragile bond began to form, threaded with tension and unspoken questions. One evening, as the moon cast silver light through the tall windows of the library, Kale approached her quietly. Alara was reading a scroll, tracing the faded letters with her fingers. "You fear me?" he said softly.
"I do," she admitted without looking up, "because power is dangerous."
"And you? You are not afraid of it. You are drawn to it."
Kale's gaze softened. "I am drawn to you," he said honestly.
"Not because of power, but because of who you are. Even in darkness, even in chains, I see strength in you that no one else has ever seen." Alara's fingers stilled on the scroll. For the first time, her eyes lifted to meet his. The moonlight revealed her stormy gaze, hesitant, cautious, yet something else lingered there. Curiosity, hope, and the faintest glimmer of trust. They were interrupted by a sudden noise, a clatter of metal from the corridor outside. Kale's hand went to the hilt of his sword, instincts flaring. Alara's body tensed, and for the first time, the chains rattled. A servant appeared, bowing deeply. "Forgive me, your majesty. There is news from the northern border. A messenger demands an audience." Kale nodded, his expression unreadable. He glanced at Alara. "Wait here," he instructed, though part of him knew she would not remain idle. She was restless, like a coiled spring, impossible to contain entirely. The days that followed were a test of patience and restraint. Alara's power began to stir, subtle tremors in the air when her emotions rose. A glass might shake, a candle flicker. Kale noticed each time, watching her not with fear, but with careful attention, as if measuring the depth of a hidden ocean. One night, Kale found her standing by the window, looking out over the kingdom. The moon painted her silhouette in silver, delicate yet unyielding. "You could leave," he said quietly. "If you wished, no one would stop you." Alara's eyes did not waver from the horizon.
"I do not know what freedom is," she said softly. "I have been buried in darkness for so long."
"I do not know the world above, and yet I am afraid not to try." Kale stepped closer, careful, as though crossing some invisible line would shatter the fragile peace. "Then we will learn it together," he said, and something in his tone, the unyielding steadiness, the promise behind the words, made her heart beat a little faster, though she would not admit it. It was in that quiet understanding, that unspoken acknowledgement, that the bond between them began to solidify. Kale saw her not as a prisoner, but as a person who had survived unspeakable trials. Alara began to see him not as a king, but as someone willing to understand, someone who might choose her, not for power or duty, but for who she truly was. Yet the peace was fragile. Alara's chain-bound wrists ached, a constant reminder of the prison she had left and the danger she still represented. The palace, for all its light and grandeur, felt like another cage, And Kale, despite his instincts and care, knew that her awakening would draw attention, eyes that sought to exploit her power. One night, as a storm raged outside the castle walls, lightning flashing across the sky, Kale found her in the library once more. She had been tracing symbols on a scroll, her eyes intense with concentration.
Do you know what they are?
He asked, curiosity edging his voice.
Elara looked up startled. Old runes, she said softly. They speak of binding and of freedom, of shadows and of light. They are part of me in a way.
Kale's brow furrowed. Part of you? How?
She hesitated, then whispered, almost to herself. Because I was born for something greater. Something
Dangerous.
Kale felt a chill run down his spine. He had sensed it before, the pull of her power, the latent force beneath her calm surface. Now, hearing her speak, he understood the weight of what lay ahead.
This was no ordinary girl. This was a being whose presence could reshape the kingdom or destroy it.
And then, in the quiet of the storm-lit library, Kale realized the truth that both terrified and compelled him. He could not keep her contained. He could not protect her entirely, nor could he turn away.
She had been hidden for centuries, buried beneath stone in silence, yet now she had been found, and fate, relentless as the storm outside, had chosen him as her witness.
Before either could speak further, a sharp knock echoed from the library doors. Kale's hand went to the hilt of his sword instinctively, while Alara's eyes flickered with caution. A messenger stepped inside, eyes wide with urgency. "Your Majesty," the man said, voice trembling.
There is news
From the southern provinces.
a threat, and it concerns the one beneath the hall.
Alara's eyes widened. Her past, long buried, had begun to reach for her.
Kale's jaw tightened. Whatever had been hidden for generations was no longer content to remain silent,
And in that instant, both understood. The world above, bright and ordered, would not stay unaware for long. The chains, the shadows, the silence, they were no longer enough. The storm had passed, leaving the castle drenched in silver light from the early morning sun. The hall smelled of rain and wet stone, and the air carried a quiet tension, as if the walls themselves held their breath.
Elara stood near the balcony of the library, the chains that bound her wrists heavier in her mind than on her skin. She had slept little, haunted by dreams that were not hers alone, visions of fire, shadows, and whispers that spoke of things she could not yet understand.
Kale entered silently, his boots echoing softly on the polished stone floor. He paused at the doorway, watching her, the sunlight catching the sharp lines of his face.
The intensity in his eyes made her turn slowly, wary but not afraid. Their bond had grown, fragile and uneven, but it existed.
A spark of understanding that neither could name, though both felt it pull at them with quiet insistence. "You did not sleep," he said quietly. His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, a concern that made her heart skip.
"I dreamt,"
she admitted, her hands brushing the chains.
"Dreams of fire and shadows, of voices that call my name."
Kale stepped closer, his gaze searching hers. "It is the curse," he said softly. "Or perhaps the gift. I do not know yet."
"But it is awakening, and it will not be quiet." Elara's eyes flickered with fear, but also with determination. "I have been buried for so long," she said, her voice firm, "that I have forgotten who I am. I only know the darkness."
"But I feel it now. Something rising inside me."
"And I cannot hide it anymore."
Kale regarded her in silence, weighing his words.
"Then we must face it together," he said. "I will not let you face it alone."
Her gaze softened slightly, but she did not speak. Trust was not given lightly. It was earned, step by careful step. And Kale had earned some measure of it, though neither could speak the depth of what had begun to grow between them. The days that followed were restless. Elara's power began to manifest in small, unpredictable ways.
A candle might flare suddenly, or the water in a basin ripple without cause. Shadows shifted when she moved, curling like fingers in the corners of her vision. Kale noticed each instance, carefully observing, never showing fear but always watching, always present. One evening he found her in the training hall, the chains removed for safety under his supervision. She moved cautiously, practicing control, summoning small sparks of energy that danced along her fingertips. The display was mesmerizing, dangerous, and beautiful. You must control it, Kale said, his voice low, almost a whisper. Do not let it control you. I am learning, she said, eyes focused, fingers trembling slightly. But it is different now. I feel it stronger than ever. And sometimes, I feel it wants more than I do. Kale stepped closer, careful not to crowd her. Then we will learn together, he said, offering a hand not of command, but of support. The gesture was simple, yet it carried weight. Alara hesitated, then placed her hand in his. The contact sent a subtle warmth through her, a reassurance she had not known in years. The bond between them deepened, fragile and intricate, built on mutual respect and understanding. Kale was not just a king. He was a protector, a witness to her power and her pain. Alara was not just a prisoner. She was a force, awakening, struggling, but alive in a way she had never known. Yet the awakening of her power drew attention. News traveled faster than they expected. Whispers in the kingdom spoke of a girl beneath the hall, a shadow child with power unclaimed. Some saw a threat, some saw a tool. And in the court, eyes that had once seemed distant now sharpened, watching, waiting for a chance to use her. Kale knew the danger but did not waver. He trained her, guided her, and protected her, yet he also recognized the tension within himself. He was drawn to her not only by curiosity or instinct, but by something deeper, a recognition of her strength, her resilience, her vulnerability. And she in turn felt the stirrings of a trust she had never allowed herself to feel. One night the castle was quiet, the moonlight spilling into the library. Alara had been practicing her control, small sparks dancing along her hands, illuminating her face with a pale glow. Kale watched silently, seated nearby, observing the precision and the restraint she was learning to wield. You are stronger than you realize, he said softly.
And you are not alone. Alara paused, her hands trembling as she let the sparks fade.
She looked at him, searching for something in his eyes, a promise, an understanding, a warning.
I have been alone my whole life,
She whispered. Even in darkness, even in chains, I do not know what it means to be seen. Kale stood and crossed the distance between them. He did not touch her yet, but his presence was steady, a pillar she could rely on. Then see yourself through my eyes, he said quietly. I see strength, courage, and someone who has survived everything the world has thrown at her. I will not let you face it alone. The words struck something within her. Trust was difficult, fragile, and dangerous, but it began to take root. She felt her heart, long dormant, stir in a way that was both frightening and exhilarating. Their moments of connection, though brief, were intense. A shared glance across a chamber, a brush of hands while guiding her through exercises, a quiet word spoken in the moonlit library. They built a bond neither could name, yet both could feel. But as with all things powerful, there were consequences. One evening, as they trained in a secluded courtyard, Alara's concentration faltered. Her power surged unexpectedly, throwing sparks into the night air, shaking the stones beneath their feet. Kale steadied her, holding her close to prevent a mishap. It is too strong, she said, her voice trembling. I cannot fully control it yet. You will, he replied firmly, his hand brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. And I will be here until you do. You do not have to bear this alone. The intimacy of the moment was electric, though neither spoke of it. They were careful, aware of the boundaries their positions demanded, yet unable to deny the pull between them. It was a tension that simmered beneath the surface, a fire contained for now but impossible to ignore.
As the days passed, the court's whispers grew louder. Rumors of her presence reached the ears of those who sought power, those who would manipulate Kale through the girl beneath the hall. Ilara knew that danger was closing in, yet she felt a strange exhilaration in the awareness of her own strength. And then, one night a messenger arrived, drenched from the rain, bearing news that chilled both Kale and Ilara. "Your Majesty," the man said, shivering, "the southern provinces report
Unrest! Strange occurrences. Shadows moving where there should be none. And they speak of a girl beneath the hall." Ilara's eyes widened.
Her heart pounded. The past she had buried, the life she had hidden from the world, was reaching into the present. Kale's hand tightened on the messenger's arm.
"Show me!"
he demanded, his eyes locked on hers, the intensity unmistakable.
"Tell me everything they have seen!"
The messenger recounted tales of fires that had no source, of animals behaving strangely, of shadows that seemed alive. Each story resonated with Ilara, echoing the dreams she had been having, the power she had begun to sense within herself. She turned to Kale, her voice trembling.
"It is me. It must be me. They see what I am becoming."
Kale nodded, his expression hardening with resolve. "Then we prepare."
"You are not a threat to me, Ilara, but the world will see you as one, and we must protect both you and the kingdom." The storm had ended, but a new one had begun. One that would test their bond, their trust, and the strength of the powers awakening within her.
That night, as Ilara lay in the quiet of her chamber, she felt the stirrings of her gift more strongly than ever. The shadows whispered. The walls seemed to pulse with life, and the chains that had bound her wrists were now insignificant compared to the forces she was beginning to command. And somewhere in the quiet corridors of the palace, Kale's presence lingered, a reminder that she was not alone. Yet even as he watched over her, a thought gnawed at the edges of his mind. Power like hers could not remain hidden forever, and the world outside would not wait. The darkness beneath the hall had awakened, and with it, so had destiny. The night had fallen over Frosthold Castle, cloaking the grand halls in silver and shadow. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain and distant fires, stirring the banners that hung along the battlements. Inside, the castle was tense with anticipation. Word of Ilara's awakening had spread beyond the walls, and forces both mortal and mystical were converging upon her.
Ilara stood in the highest tower, her hands tracing the intricate symbols carved into the stone floor. She had learned much in the days since the shadow from her past had arrived, how to focus her power, how to summon it without fear, and how to channel the darkness that had long been her companion. The chains that once bound her wrists were gone, replaced by a quiet mastery she was only beginning to understand. Kale entered the tower quietly, his cloak brushing against the stone. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, took in the sight of her, strong, poised, and yet human, carrying both the weight of her past and the promise of her power. "You are ready," he said quietly, though the certainty in his voice was not complete. He had never faced power like hers, not truly, and he knew that the world beyond these walls would test them both. Ilara turned to him, her stormy eyes meeting his. "I do not know if I am," she admitted, "but I cannot hide any more." "The darkness beneath the hall, it will not let me stay buried, and neither can I remain afraid." Kale stepped closer, careful not to crowd her, yet close enough that their shared tension was palpable. "Then we face it together," he said. "I will not leave you. I will not let anyone harm you. Not the world, not the shadows, not the curse." The storm outside intensified, rain lashing against the tower windows, wind howling like the cries of ancient spirits. Ilara felt her power stir in response, shadows flickering across the walls, light bending in strange patterns. She closed her eyes, drawing it inward, shaping it with her will. "You have changed," Kale said softly. "The girl beneath the hall. She is gone. I see her strength now. I see you." Ilara's lips pressed into a thin line. The recognition in his words brought both comfort and fear. She had never allowed herself to be seen, not truly. And yet here was a king who did not see her as cursed or dangerous,
but as someone worthy of trust. Before they could speak further, a sudden movement in the shadows alerted them. The figure from her past, the one who had come with warnings, stepped forward, cloak dark as night, eyes gleaming with intent.
"You cannot hide anymore," the figure said, voice sharp and commanding. "The darkness beneath the hall calls, and it will claim both you and the king who protects you."
"You have awakened, but the price has come due." Alara's hands trembled slightly, but she did not step back.
"I am not afraid," she said, though her voice carried the echo of centuries of fear and isolation. "If this darkness seeks to consume me, I will meet it on my own terms." Kale moved to stand beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder.
"You will not face it alone," he said, his voice steady. "Whatever comes, we face it together. Trust me." The figure from her past laughed softly, a sound like the rustle of dry leaves. "Trust?"
"The king trusts too easily. The girl beneath the hall is dangerous, and she will bring ruin if left unchecked."
Alara stepped forward, drawing her power outward. Shadows swirled around her, bending and curling in response to her will. Light and darkness danced along the stone walls, illuminating the tower in flickering, ethereal patterns.
"I am not the same girl you buried beneath the hall," she said, voice growing stronger. "I am Alara, and I will not be controlled."
Kale's gaze met hers, unwavering, and she felt a warmth in his presence that steadied her. Together they faced the figure side by side as if the connection between them added weight to her power, shaping it, giving it purpose. The shadow figure lunged, a surge of dark energy rushing toward them. Alara focused, summoning the strength she had built over the weeks of training and trial. The shadows responded, forming a shield of swirling black and silver light that met the attack. Sparks and echoes filled the tower as darkness collided with darkness. Power against power. Kale moved with precision, not to fight her, but to guide her. His presence was steady, a calm center in the chaos. "Focus," he whispered.
"Do not let the darkness take you! Shape it! Bend it! Own it!"
Alara closed her eyes, breathing deeply. Memories of years in the chamber beneath the hall, of silence, of fear, of loneliness surged through her.
Each one strengthened her resolve, feeding the power that had once terrified her. She opened her eyes, and the shadows obeyed her command, bending and folding around her in patterns of light and dark that shimmered with her will. The shadow figure recoiled, its own power faltering in the face of her strength.
"Impossible," it hissed.
"You should be mine! The curse should control you! I am not the curse," Alara said, stepping forward, her voice resonant with authority. "I am me, and I choose."
The figure's form shimmered, then dissolved into the mist, leaving behind only a whisper. "This is not the end." Kale exhaled, relief flickering across his face.
"You did it,"
he said softly, though his eyes remained wary.
"You controlled it!"
Alara looked at him, her chest heaving, shadows still dancing along her hands.
"I could not have done it without you," she admitted. "Your presence, it gave me something I never had."
Kale reached for her hand, brushing his fingers against hers.
"And you gave me something I did not know I needed," he said, voice low. "You made me see what I could not see before. Strength, resilience, and trust."
For a moment, silence fell over them, a quiet calm after the storm of power. The castle beyond the tower walls remained unaware, but within this room a transformation had occurred.
The girl once buried in darkness was no longer a prisoner. The king had found not only a subject to protect, but a partner in strength and understanding.
Alara stepped closer, her hand brushing against Kale's. Neither spoke immediately, but the unspoken words hung between them. Connection, trust, and the beginning of something that neither power nor fear could undo.
Yet even in this victory, the world outside remained a threat. Rumors would continue, and enemies would watch, waiting for weakness.
But Kale and Alara now faced the future together, each aware of the other's strength, each willing to protect and guide the other. The next day they walked through the castle corridors side by side, the sun rising over Frosthold, casting long shadows that mirrored their unity. Courtiers looked on with curiosity, sensing the shift in the king's demeanor, though none could name its source. Alara moved with confidence now, her steps measured, her presence commanding yet calm.
The girl who had once been hidden beneath the hall was no longer invisible. She had been tempered in darkness and now walked in light, though her power remained a silent, potent force that none could ignore.
Kale remained close, always watchful, always steady. Their bond had grown into something neither could fully name: mutual respect, shared understanding, and a quiet, undeniable connection that did not need words.
As they reached the balcony overlooking the kingdom, Alara felt the wind on her face, the first real breath of freedom she had ever known. Kale stepped beside her, his presence reassuring, and together they gazed out at the world they had both inherited and would shape.
"You are ready now," Kale said, voice soft but certain. "Not just for the kingdom, but for yourself. You have control, you have power, and you have choice."
Alara's lips curved in a small, genuine smile.
"Choice," she repeated.
"Yes, I have choice.
"And I will not waste it." The shadows beneath the hall remained silent now, not because they were gone, but because they had recognized the new balance. Darkness and light, power and control, past and future, all had found their place within her. Kale reached for her hand, and this time there was no hesitation. Their fingers entwined, a silent promise that whatever came, they would face it together. And for the first time in centuries, Alara felt peace, not the stillness of a prison, but the quiet strength of someone who had survived, who had grown, who had chosen. Above, the sun rose fully, spilling golden light across Frosthold Castle. Shadows remained, but they no longer threatened. The ceremony hall, once the site of her hidden life, now stood as a symbol of rebirth, of power reclaimed, and of destiny embraced. Yet in the corners of the kingdom, whispers continued, forces unseen, watching, waiting.
The darkness might sleep, but it never truly dies. And one day, it might return.
But for now, in the quiet strength of the tower, two hearts stood united, ready to face whatever came next, not as prisoner and king, not as shadow and light, but as equals, bound by trust, respect, and the promise of what they could become together. Alara looked at Kale, her eyes reflecting both the trials she had endured and the hope she now carried. "I am ready," she said softly. Kale smiled, a rare, gentle expression that softened his stern features. "And I will be with you," he replied. "Always." The wind carried their words across the castle walls, a quiet anthem of transformation, of redemption, and of the power that comes not from fear, but from choice. The shadows beneath the hall had been conquered, not by force alone, but by courage, trust, and love. And though the world beyond remained unpredictable, inside the castle, two souls had found their place, and in doing so, had changed the fate of the kingdom itself.